I sat at my computer, absorbed in our financial records, as she entered the room. Her late returns from work had become a routine, almost reaching 10 o'clock tonight. The kids were already in bed, oblivious to her absence. It saddened me how they had stopped asking about her altogether, a recent development. Our finances had taken a nosedive over the past 2 years. Despite the significant decrease in income, my wife seemed oblivious, spending as freely as ever. After settling the latest round of bills, I calculated we could scrape by for another couple of months. I pondered my life plan during these reviews, questioning if I had made a mistake. For 2 years, I had been living with the looming uncertainty of a crumbling marriage, wondering when it would finally collapse. Doubts were starting to creep in. Lost in my thoughts, I didn't notice how long she had been standing there, arms crossed with a familiar look of disdain. Finally, she broke the silence. "Michael, I want a divorce." I struggled to pinpoint my emotions in that moment. Overwhelmed with self-doubt and turmoil, I almost felt numb to her declaration. It wasn't humorous, yet I found myself trying to suppress a laugh. After 17 years together, my wife was announcing the end, tearing apart everything we had built. An unfamiliar sensation washed over me, relief. I glanced at her briefly, reminiscing about happier times before snapping back to reality. Okay. Despite excelling as a programmer, my career path led me to senior management in product development. It was a title more focused on salesmanship than programming. While I was content with the salary and benefits, I missed the hands-on work of programming. Meetings and calls consumed my days, leaving me to watch younger developers showcase their latest projects. As much as I valued being in charge, I yearned for a role that allowed me to dive back into programming. It came as no surprise when I received the pink slip from Chicago Technology Solutions. If I were in their shoes, I would have done the same. My attendance at meetings was erratic, and I missed too many deadlines. Although I didn't actively seek termination, I didn't put in much effort to retain my position at CTS. I had been in a funk for quite some time. It took nearly 3 months to shake off my initial depression and attempt to move forward. However, that endeavor ended in disappointment as well. It took an additional month to find a solution to my predicament, one that I could accept. I truly believe I would have lost my sanity if not for the kids. Their consistent routine helped me regain a sense of purpose. Breakfast, school, snack, homework, dinner, bed, it became my mantra and guided me back to a positive path. Embracing my role as a stay-at-home dad, I took charge of household chores and chauffeuring duties. The kids appreciated my increased presence, which helped me recognize my own value. I wasn't completely worthless. If my wife noticed any change in our family dynamic, she never acknowledged it. I doubt she even noticed. I met Jennifer Riley at a fraternity mixer, although I almost skipped the event altogether. Joining the fraternity was more about post-graduation opportunities than attending parties during school. I felt I needed all the help I could get, as everything about me seemed average: height, weight, looks, personality, even my name, Michael, was the epitome of average. Away from a computer, I wasn't particularly unique. Dating? A few. Relationships? Not so much. I was getting used to my own company during my senior year of college until I saw Jennifer Riley. Jennifer was nearly as average as me, but somehow average looked exceptional on her. She was somewhat reserved, a bit of a wallflower. I observed her from afar before mustering the courage to speak to her. Our initial interaction was brief and subdued, but it laid the groundwork. Over the next few weeks, we shared coffee breaks and study sessions at the library. It was almost 2 months before our first official date. From that moment on, it was the most incredible period of my life, 15 years of pure bliss. Our courtship was brief, our engagement even briefer. We were married and settled in our first apartment in Chicago shortly after graduation. Despite financial struggles, commuting together to our first jobs on the train, we were in it together. We shared almost everything in common: family backgrounds, dating experiences, interests, and goals. Where one of us lacked, the other excelled. I managed our finances better, while Jennifer handled our social and family schedules expertly. Together, we complemented each other, and our lives flourished. Over the next few years, we both received multiple promotions, expanding our circle of friends significantly. We saved up for our first home while still enjoying travel and entertainment. Our intimate life mirrored our relationship's progression, starting slowly, with hand-holding and kisses from our first date. As our commitment deepened, so did our physical connection, culminating in intimacy on the night of our engagement. Our passion blossomed alongside our shared successes. When our son Jacob was born, Jennifer chose to leave her job after 8 years. A year later, our daughter Emily arrived. Their names, popular at the time, followed a family tradition. We settled into a 3-bedroom house in the suburbs, complete with space for a dog. Our family expanded to include a sedan and a minivan. Life was comfortable and fulfilling: 2 kids, a pet, a house, and 2 cars. Utterly average, yet I couldn't have been happier. My promotion to manager shortly after Emily's first birthday felt like recognition for years of being part of the overlooked masses. With a higher salary and flexible work schedule, including telecommuting, life became even better. While money couldn't buy happiness, it did afford us better living standards, improved health care, and increased confidence. From being average, we moved to slightly above average, and I found Jennifer even more attractive than before. Our sex life reached new heights, we traveled more, spent quality time with our children, and saved diligently for retirement. When Emily started elementary school, Jennifer decided to return to work part-time. She found a job she enjoyed at a startup marketing firm, allowing her to balance work with family commitments seamlessly. Discovering my wife's infidelity by chance, just before our 15th anniversary, shattered my world. I stumbled upon the evidence 2 days before my birthday but didn't connect the dots until weeks later. Initially, I didn't think much of Jennifer's increased involvement at work. It meant minor adjustments to our routines, but I was happy to accommodate. Little did I know, it would lead to the unraveling of our marriage. After about 3 months, I noticed my wife seemed distracted. When I asked her about it, she mentioned she was trying to find her footing at work and was feeling stressed. To ease her burden, I took on more responsibilities at home. Our once passionate sex life took a noticeable dive, prompting a discussion. My wife attributed it to aging, stating she didn't need to be as sexually active as before. While her use of explicit language surprised me, things briefly improved. However, the spark faded again, and I hesitated to bring it up to avoid conflict. One day, while searching for a sweater, I stumbled upon a gift hidden in my wife's closet. The unmistakable pink box from a lingerie store caught my eye. Intrigued, I found a card addressed to lover inside. Overwhelmed with conflicting emotions, I decided to peek inside the box, eager for the surprise it promised. The card hinted at a sexual fantasy involving anal sex, a desire I had harbored for some time. Excited by the prospect, I went all out to make her birthday special, showering her with affection and attention. However, her response seemed lukewarm, as if she were merely tolerating my efforts. On my birthday, despite her late return from work, I eagerly anticipated my gift. We went out for pizza with the kids, and I sensed a hint of surprise in her eyes. As the evening progressed, my anticipation grew. Back home, the wait for the kids to settle down felt endless. When I finally entered the bedroom, expecting my surprise, I found my wife already in bed, dressed conservatively in a flannel nightgown. Frustrated by the delay, I wondered when I would receive my gift. Oops, I almost forgot. With those words, she retrieved a small square box from her nightstand drawer, wrapped in the multicolor balloon paper from Michael's last birthday, and handed it to me. "Happy birthday, dear," she said before rolling over, switching off her light, and drifting off to sleep. I was too stunned to even open the gift. The weight of disappointment settled in the next day as I replayed the events of my birthday in my mind, trying to understand what went wrong. I couldn't pinpoint anything I had done to sour the evening, and it left me feeling lost and despondent. For nearly 2 weeks, I wallowed in my despair, haunted by the unopened present that seemed to mock my failure. I had heard the cliches about husbands being the last to know, but I genuinely hadn't considered the possibility of Jennifer cheating on me. However, when she called home 13 days later to say she'd be late due to Alan's birthday celebration, a sinking feeling consumed me. "It's Alan's 30th birthday, and the staff is taking him out to celebrate. I might be pretty late," she explained over the phone. I don't recall how I reacted or even how I made it to the bedroom closet, but I distinctly remember the empty space where my gift had been. The pain in my chest was unbearable, and I found myself retching in the bathroom, briefly hoping it was a heart attack that would end my suffering. Alan Henderson, Jennifer's slick and disingenuous boss, flashed through my mind. I had met him once and didn't trust him. However, it was my daughter Emily's concerned voice that snapped me back to reality. "Are you okay, Daddy?" she asked, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a stomachache. I'll be out in a minute," I reassured her, struggling to compose myself. I eventually emerged from the bathroom, but the details of the rest of the night escaped me. I only remember reaching for my neglected bottle of scotch and the pounding headache that greeted me the next morning. When I found Jennifer in the kitchen the following day, feeding the children as if nothing had happened, I noticed a subtle wince on her face. It was that moment that extinguished any remaining love I had for her. I wish I could say I confronted my unfaithful wife, but I didn't. I was devastated, barely able to function for weeks. Every day felt like a struggle as I watched my wife go about her routine with no regard for the pain she'd caused. It felt like rock bottom. It wasn't until our 15th wedding anniversary approached that I snapped out of my daze and decided to take action. I called my lawyer, determined to end the charade of our marriage. Little did I know, things were about to get worse. Walking into my lawyer's office with a determined attitude, I left feeling crushed. My hopes of a favorable divorce outcome were shattered. Without evidence of her affair, our assets would be split evenly, and I'd likely end up paying spousal and child support. My wife, the cheater, would likely retain primary custody of our children and stay in our house. I felt like a fool. As if things couldn't get any worse, I lost my job. But oddly enough, it turned out to be a blessing in disguise. One evening, while watching the news, I saw a story about a bankrupt company leaving its employees in financial ruin. Surprisingly, it gave me a glimmer of hope. Despite my own struggles, I realized there were others facing even greater hardships. It was a small comfort in a sea of despair. It didn't take much for me to connect the dots and come up with a basic plan. If there was nothing left to take, my wife couldn't take anything. Sure, it meant I'd be screwing myself over too, but considering I was already losing half, did it really matter? My plan was straightforward. I was unemployed and had no intention of finding work. I'd drain our life savings until there was nothing left. Admittedly, it was a crazy idea, and even I didn't think it would work. But it gave me something to hold on to. 2 years is a long time to be alone. It was painfully boring, especially since Jennifer had been the life of our social circle. As she distanced herself from me, I found myself without strong friendships. Being an only child with deceased parents left me truly alone. My life during those 2 years was nothing short of dreadful, with my children being the only bright spot. I'd never been one to spend money on luxuries before, but now I was making up for lost time. I started making large cash withdrawals and splurged on extravagant purchases. I enrolled in an expensive MBA program, bought a luxury SUV, and fully funded my children's educational savings accounts. I also spent lavishly on clothes and entertainment, all while stashing away a significant portion of the money for my post-divorce fund. One of my biggest expenses was hiring a private investigator to surveil my wife and her lover. I wanted detailed reports, photos, and videos of their activities, no matter the cost. Did my wife notice my spending habits? Probably, except for the gambling. I made sure she saw my car and new clothes, but she never questioned it. Meanwhile, I watched as she made her own purchases without comment. Our relationship had deteriorated to the point where we were like cordial roommates who didn't particularly like each other. Sex was out of the question, and we barely interacted beyond daily necessities. Spending time with my children became the highlight of my days. We bonded over homework, games, and outdoor activities like going to parks and biking. I even let them help me in the kitchen as I took on the role of house chef. Jennifer was still around during the week, but I didn't actively include or exclude her from our family time. If she wanted to participate, she did so without any prompting from me. I received weekly reports on my wife's activities, confirming my suspicions of her affair with her boss, Alan Henderson. However, it turned out she was involved with several men from her office and even some clients. Surprisingly, discovering the truth didn't affect me much emotionally. The videos and pictures provided by the surveillance were more tedious than anything else. It became apparent that Alan was not particularly skilled in bed, despite his numerous partners. Most of the encounters seemed transactional, with no emotional connection. One client, however, stood out for his aggressive behavior, leaving me to wonder if my wife found any pleasure in such encounters. After about a year, I realized I hadn't experienced arousal or sexual pleasure since the ordeal began. It was just another addition to the misery of my life. I eventually stopped the surveillance, finding it more of a burden than anything else. With plenty of free time on my hands, I focused on improving myself for life after marriage. I started a new exercise routine and dedicated time to researching advancements in my industry. Despite feeling behind, I made progress in both physical fitness and professional knowledge, particularly regarding my former company, CTS, which seemed stagnant in the competitive tech market. I dedicated a significant amount of time to researching divorces, though I also indulged in devising plans to deal with my soon-to-be ex-wife. However, my primary focus was understanding how divorce affects children. Having already processed much of my own pain, I wanted to ensure I was fully prepared for their transition. I sifted through a plethora of information, much of which I found to be unhelpful. About 8 months into my journey, I began to feel uneasy. My wife started returning home at regular hours and engaging in conversations with me about my day. Despite my brief responses, she persisted. She even started dressing more provocatively, as if attempting to reignite the intimacy of our past life. However, things took a turn for the worse when she began complaining about our lack of communication and expressing a desire to work on our marriage. In response, I chose complete silence. Her efforts at reconciliation persisted until her birthday. I left her present on the dining table, wrapped in recycled paper from her previous gift to me. Its contents were no surprise, considering it was identical to a watch I had spotted in a convenience store months ago. Despite my initial anger, I eventually purchased it, waiting 18 months to give it to her. Although I didn't witness her reaction when she opened the gift, our routine quickly resumed as she started staying late at the office again. Communication between us dwindled until she finally uttered the words, "Michael, I want a divorce." Despite hoping for a swift resolution, it took nearly a week for me to be served with her petition, which outlined spousal and child support, asset distribution in her favor, and cited mental and emotional cruelty. Deciding to shield the children from the impending confrontation, I took them camping for 6 days. Upon our return, Jennifer was waiting for us at home, looking unwell. I couldn't help but wonder which part of the situation surprised her the most. I filed for divorce on grounds of adultery, seeking the house, full custody of the children, and financial support as I had been unemployed and caring for the children for 2 years. Despite knowing the slim chances of winning, I filed lawsuits against Jennifer's sexual partners for alienation of affection, as allowed by Illinois law. Civil suits were also filed against her employer and the companies of her clients involved. Additionally, I sent evidence to her parents and best friend as a warning. As the kids headed to bed without acknowledging their mother, I grabbed a beer and sat across from Jennifer, who seemed sick and tearful. When she whispered about being ruined, I replied, "God, I hope so," feeling no satisfaction as she cried. When she asked if I hated her, I clarified that hate requires effort and all my energy was devoted to my children. Refusing to acknowledge her as my wife, I declared my late wife was a loving partner and mother, while she was nothing but a whore. As she asked what to do next, I responded, "Is that a rhetorical question, or do you really want my answer?" without giving her a chance to reply. There are a few potential paths you could take from here. You could start fresh in a new location, far away from here. That's what I would do. I won't allow our children to spend significant time with you, so that shouldn't factor into your decision. Alternatively, you could try to tough it out here, keeping a low profile in town. But who knows who might catch wind of your activities, or who would be willing to employ someone like you. Maybe you could find some desperate man who doesn't mind that you're a whore. But what kind of person would that make him? Or, worst case scenario, you could end your own life. I really hope you don't choose that option. It would rob me of the satisfaction of seeing you suffer like the bitch you are. But then again, I doubt my opinion matters much to someone like you. It certainly didn't when you decided to start sleeping with your boss. I had rehearsed that speech in my head for months. I should have felt some sense of triumph delivering it. But as each word fell from my lips, crushing whatever remained of her spirit, I found myself feeling hollow instead. Life after divorce was a mixed bag. Surprisingly, my lawsuits yielded better results than expected. I received over $1 million in settlements from the 3 companies whose employees had been involved with my ex-wife. It was unexpected, considering my lawyer's initial pessimism. We concluded that the companies, after witnessing how we handled my ex-wife's employer, wanted to avoid the negative publicity. Through legal maneuvers like discovery motions, depositions, and press leaks, we effectively dismantled my ex-wife's company. I also conducted a discreet campaign, alerting the CEOs of their clients to the scandal involving my wife, her boss, and their associates. Slowly but surely, their revenues dwindled, leading to bankruptcy. Alan Henderson was fired and left town in disgrace. While the $200,000 check I received was smaller in comparison, it brought me great satisfaction. My alienation of affection lawsuits didn't yield anything, as I had expected. However, 4 wives of the men involved later secured favorable divorce settlements. It wasn't all smooth sailing. I faced ridicule and taunts from acquaintances familiar with my situation, which was challenging to endure. However, I was already grappling with feelings of inadequacy, so their words didn't affect me deeply. Some of the insults were surprisingly creative, though. I made sure to shield my children from the fallout of our situation as much as possible. Their well-being was always my top priority. While they were sad for a while, they eventually bounced back. My biggest achievement during that time was my return to CTS as the Vice President of Design and Development. As a distraction from my personal struggles, I delved back into programming. Over the 2 challenging years, I developed an add-on for the main CTS software, facilitating seamless integration with 2 other popular software packages from competitors. Starting my own company to sell this design proved successful, with offers from all 3 companies to buy my company and software. I sold my company for $11 million and received an exceptional compensation package from CTS. Retirement crossed my mind briefly, but with my lack of social life, I knew I needed a reason to leave the house every day. With my newfound income, I hired a lovely elderly lady named Mrs. Marlene Jensen to serve as a part-time housekeeper and nanny for the kids. After a year, she became a full-time resident in the in-law suite above our garage in our new home. She became a grandmother figure to my children, offering them invaluable advice born from a lifetime of experience. I cherished her guidance, turning to her for advice in my own decisions. As the children grew into well-adjusted adults, our bond weakened over time, but I harbored no resentment. It was better for them to keep their distance from my bitterness. Mrs. Jensen remained with us until the kids left for college, retiring with free room and board as her pension. She had been a constant presence in my life for 15 years, urging me to open up and find companionship. However, she passed away knowing I would always be alone. I never allowed myself to open up to anyone again. My friendships remained superficial, and I rarely dated, aside from a few group outings arranged by casual acquaintances. I gained a reputation as a cold and ruthless individual, unapproachable and best avoided. I accepted that this was largely my own doing. To satisfy my sexual needs, I maintained a rotation of call girls and escorts, compensating them generously for their time and services. There was one, Mary Beth, who went by Candy, whom I grew fond of for a while. She was passionate and willing, and I suspect I meant more to her than just a client. However, I couldn't burden her with my inner demons, so I ended our arrangement when I sensed her attachment growing too strong. As for Jennifer's whereabouts, her life took a difficult turn. Despite my warnings, she attempted to reach out to me for nearly a year. It's unclear what she hoped to achieve, whether reconciliation or a relationship with my children. She persisted, so I had her monitored when she remained in Chicago. Whenever she pursued a job, I ensured her work history followed her. When she entered the dating scene, I sent her potential partners information about her past, ensuring she couldn't rewrite history. My ex-wife bombarded me with unanswered calls, unread letters, and emails I never opened. Part of me, sick as it sounds, sought some form of retribution. Perhaps seeking professional help early on could have salvaged part of my soul and restored a sense of normalcy. But I didn't seek help, allowing the situation to spiral out of control. I responded to her attempts at communication with a gift, a risque lingerie piece wrapped in white ribbon with a handwritten note addressed to bitch. Among the lingerie, I included a clear message with a massive butt plug and a bottle of lube, accompanied by a note saying, "Geo, fuck yourself." When one of her potential partners confronted me for tormenting her, he confronted me physically. Despite lacking any combat training, my rage drove me to retaliate. I left him with injuries, and he faced legal consequences. After a year of surveillance, I ceased monitoring her when she secured employment at a hotel in Virginia, over 700 miles away. I encountered her again 16 years later at my daughter's wedding, and I didn't intervene when my children reconnected with her after college. The passing years hadn't been kind to her. She appeared older, having gained weight and developed wrinkles, signs of a new smoking habit. Despite this, beneath the worn exterior, I still recognized the woman I once loved. Though I felt no emotional connection, I acknowledged her presence. During the wedding, she remained distant, seated alone in the back of the church's bride section. Our interaction was limited to a brief, polite exchange with our daughter. It wasn't until the end of the evening, as she waited for a cab outside, that I noticed the small gold band and diamond on her left ring finger. Perhaps she had found happiness after all. Approaching her, I couldn't help but notice the sadness in her eyes. "For the record, you ruined my life first," she said softly, her gaze meeting mine. Glancing at her ring, I replied, "I'm glad you found someone. I hope he makes you happy." Quickly retreating to my car, my driver Jonathan greeted me. "Good evening, Mr. Smith. Are we off to the club?" "It went as well as expected, Jonathan. Let's head home." "I prefer to be alone tonight," I instructed. As we drove away, I resisted the urge to look back, but caught her brief wave. "Goodbye." Michael Smith wasn't a typical heartthrob. At first glance, he seemed unremarkable. Yet, he possessed a sweetness, intelligence, and unique charm that set him apart from other men. Our first encounter took place on a challenging night during college. Left alone at a fraternity mixer by my sorority sisters, I endured unwelcome advances from intoxicated partygoers until Michael approached me. With sincerity in his eyes, he introduced himself and engaged in genuine conversation, his voice barely above a whisper. Despite the circumstances, he made a lasting impression. "I've really enjoyed our conversation, Jennifer. I'd love to take you out for coffee sometime. Here's my name and number if you're interested. Thanks for chatting with me. It's been the highlight of my semester," he said warmly. Admittedly, I hesitated before calling him. It took me over a week to finally decide to give it a shot. When we met for coffee, he asked me a multitude of questions, making conversation effortless. It was during that initial conversation that I discovered his unique qualities. While his demeanor was modest, he possessed an undeniable brilliance. Despite being a computer science major, his knowledge spanned various subjects, showcasing his versatility. We delved into discussions about my classes, particularly my struggles with ancient philosophy, as I pursued a major in business with a minor in advertising. Throughout our conversation, Michael's gaze remained fixed on mine, conveying his genuine interest in me as a person. I couldn't help but feel flattered. He suggested studying together at the student union or library, and 3 days later, we found ourselves there. It wasn't merely studying, it felt more like advanced tutoring. Michael dedicated 3 hours on a Friday night to help me prepare for my philosophy exam. He was incredibly patient, adjusting his teaching methods whenever I struggled to grasp a concept. When I called to inform him of my passing grade on the exam the following Tuesday, I could sense his excitement through the phone. He expressed pride in my achievement, though he humbly declined any credit for his assistance, stating that spending time with me was his true motivation and the most enjoyable part of his campus experience. I discovered several ways in which Michael differed from most guys. Throughout the week, he remained entirely focused on his studies, with no inclination toward parties or drinking, nothing that could be deemed a distraction. Initially, I found this aspect somewhat irksome, but over time, it grew on me. In the following weeks, we never went on what I'd consider a traditional date, yet he made it a point to call me every day just to chat and check in. He'd leave notes to let me know he was thinking of me. Our meetings typically revolved around coffee or library sessions, occasionally punctuated by a quick lunch. During our time together, he continued to inquire about my family, interests, and aspirations, while remaining open and honest when I posed questions to him. Once, I asked him about his fears, a go-to question on my dates, as I'd read it could gauge the level of trust someone had in you. I anticipated the typical frat boy responses I'd received in the past. However, Michael's response was quite different. "I'm afraid I won't be a good father," he confessed, his gaze drifting as he recalled his upbringing. "Both my parents passed away when I was in high school, and I wasn't particularly close to them. I lived with my uncle afterward, but we had little in common. He was relieved when I left for college. I want to start a family and be a supportive husband and father, but I lack experience in a loving, nurturing environment." He paused, awaiting my reaction. "Too much?" he asked tentatively. "No, Michael. Not too much. Just enough," I reassured him. About 4 weeks into our relationship, Michael asked if I was free on Saturday. When I confirmed, he hinted at a surprise. In the days leading up to that Saturday, I grew increasingly curious, though Michael remained tight-lipped about his plans. My sorority sisters' knowing smiles and whispers only added to my anticipation. When Michael finally arrived, he was accompanied by 3 of his fraternity brothers, all dressed in matching maroon and sky blue attire, bearing a large cooler and warming trays of food. With a wide grin, he handed me a DVD and a West Ham jersey, revealing his thoughtful surprise. He asked me to lead him to the great room of the house, and as we turned the corner, the entire place was adorned in West Ham colors, and everyone started chanting. I was utterly taken aback. It all stemmed from a brief moment when I lamented missing my family's trip to England, where we planned to watch my distant cousin play for West Ham United. However, I had to skip the trip due to an important test week. I shared my disappointment with Michael in passing. What he did next was incredibly thoughtful. Michael had a friend record a West Ham game, researched their chants, taught them to his friends and my sorority sisters, and even prepared traditional English fare like fish and chips. Amidst singing, drinking, and cheering during the game, Michael made sure to quiet everyone down in the 72nd minute. It was then that I witnessed my cousin scoring his first Premier League goal, albeit tape-delayed. It was a moment my family wouldn't experience, but I got to witness it thanks to Michael's efforts. It was genuinely the kindest gesture anyone had ever done for me. After the game, Michael and his friends tidied up before leaving. He promised to call me later, leaving me to fend off teasing about the dreamy look in my eyes. It was all worth it. Our phone calls, notes, and coffee dates continued for a few more weeks until one day, while sipping on a latte, I noticed Michael seemed unusually nervous. "Is everything all right, Michael?" "Huh? Oh, yes. I was just wondering if you had any plans for Friday night. And if you're free, would you be interested in having dinner with me? Like a date with me on Friday?" "I'd love to, Michael." The relief on his face was palpable, quickly replaced by one of the widest smiles I had ever seen. From then on, everything felt like a whirlwind of love, romance, and friendship. I excelled in school, had the time of my life, and noticed people treating me differently. Being myself, the woman Michael loved, seemed to draw people to me in a new way. I must admit, being around Michael felt like a daily boost to my ego. Despite his tendency to downplay himself, he never hesitated to shower me with praise. In reality, the opposite could be said. Michael was a decent-looking guy, in good shape and somewhat athletic. He always maintained a well-groomed appearance, almost bordering on stylish. While he was personable and well-liked, he tended to be a bit reserved around new people. Undoubtedly, he was always the brightest person in the room, even outshining the professors, and everyone recognized it. Yet, he preferred to shy away from the limelight and focus his attention on spending time with me. He often joked that he was just an average guy who lucked out when he met me. As for myself, I would describe myself as cute, a sentiment echoed by my friends and family. I had always been somewhat self-conscious about my appearance and body, especially when comparing myself to some of my stunning sorority sisters with model-like looks and bikini bodies. However, seeing myself through Michael's eyes made me feel special. The longer I was with him, the more cherished I felt. Graduation brought me immense happiness. One of the sorority's end-of-year traditions was the husband potential game, where sisters could give positive or negative examples of another sister's boyfriend from the past year. Being one of the few without a long-term boyfriend, I had never participated. This event was highly anticipated by alumni and always drew a large crowd. Each sister stood before the gathered alumni to share their experiences. To my surprise, Michael received all positive responses, a first in the event's 29-year history. I couldn't have been prouder, though I was disappointed that tradition prevented me from personally telling him about his victory. 3 days later, I found a special way to reward him. Following graduation, Michael drove me home to Chicago, where he had been offered a job. During the 4-hour drive, we held hands and engaged in heartfelt conversations. We stopped for a brief breakfast and shared a quick kiss. Upon arriving at my childhood home just before lunch, Michael spent the next 2 hours charming my parents. I was taken aback when Michael asked if he could buy my dad a beer, and before I could even object, they were off. My mom's misty eyes were smiling. "Oh, Jennifer, that one is a keeper." "Believe me, Mom. I know." 2 hours later, Michael and Dad returned, smiling and laughing all the way to the front door. Michael told me he would be back to pick me up for dinner after checking into his hotel. He said a quick goodbye to my parents and was off. Later, he told me he had asked my father for permission to marry me. That night was unforgettable. It was magical. After a wonderfully romantic Italian dinner, Michael proposed to me on the sky deck of the Willis Tower. It was a clear evening, and the lights of the Chicago skyline almost matched the glow in my heart. Being a virgin throughout college had always been a slight source of embarrassment for me. I was certain I was the only sorority sister left in the house who was. But that night, it felt like a precious gift, part of a matching set. Michael gave himself to me that night in a way that was tender and loving. He cherished my virginity, and his patience and gentleness made it a perfect first-time experience. I knew Michael was also a virgin, with little experience with the opposite sex. In the glow of our post-orgasmic state, I asked him where he had learned to be such a fantastic lover. Humble as ever, he whispered to me, "I read a lot." Our lives were nearly perfect. Michael landed a good job immediately after graduation and kept getting promoted, making me happier than ever. I cannot fully express how happy I was during the first decade of our life together, nor can I adequately describe how having children completed my life. I choose not to share the details of those years because they were unrelated to my downfall. In fact, delving into those years would only obscure the motives that led to my eventual downfall. I understand my mistakes, yes, mistakes. I know why I fell. I didn't trust Michael enough. One of the things I admired most about Michael was his willingness to share his vulnerability with me. He opened up his whole being to me, including his insecurities. He never hid from me. For a long time, my life felt like a fairy tale. My family was beautiful, and Michael treated me as his full-fledged partner. He involved me in every decision that impacted our lives, regardless of the fact that he earned 5 times more than me and was better at managing our finances. His inclusion of me in decision-making made me feel special, but sometimes it also made me feel inadequate, like I wasn't fulfilling my end of the partnership. I kept this insecurity to myself, convinced that if I shared it with Michael, he would have helped me. He loved me deeply, and I know he would have supported me in feeling whole. Over the years, this tiny insecurity grew into something much bigger. By the time our kids were in school, I felt lost in my own skin. I yearned for something independent to give me purpose, not because I was looking for another lover, far from it. I loved my husband deeply, and our sex life was passionate, albeit a bit conservative, mostly due to my reluctance to explore new things. What I wanted was to feel like an equal, not just be treated like one. So, I found a job and announced my decision to take it. Surprisingly, Michael was supportive, saying, "I think that sounds great, Jennifer. Whatever makes you happy." At first, I felt exhilarated by my newfound independence. However, looking back, I realized how vain my thinking was during those initial months. I believed I could tackle the world on my own, without needing anyone's help. The atmosphere at my new workplace was flirtatious, bordering on debauchery. My coworkers, both men and women, were young, bold, and vivacious, engaging in inter-office flings without any reservations. It seemed like they were empowered by their sexuality, engaging in casual sex without forming any meaningful relationships. This was a stark contrast to our reserved friend group, where discussions about sex were rare. My boss, Alan Henderson, epitomized this atmosphere. While reasonably good-looking, he wasn't my type. He was often teased about his inability to maintain a stable relationship, yet praised for his latest conquest. I didn't immediately dive into a sexual encounter with the first person who approached me. In fact, I rejected advances from one coworker. However, these experiences made me question whether Michael and I were missing out on something in our sex life. Unlike our conservative friend group, the open discussions about sex in my workplace made me wonder if we were too reserved in our approach. After introducing Alan to Michael at our company Christmas party, everything changed. Although they pretended to get along, I sensed a tension between them. I stopped discussing my job with Michael and avoided mentioning Alan because I knew it bothered him. Following that night, I noticed a shift in the office atmosphere. Alan began giving me more attention, praising my work publicly, and asking about my well-being. He started inviting me to lunch, where we discussed our projects in great detail. Gradually, he began seeking my opinion more often, interspersing personal questions with work-related discussions. He also started complimenting my appearance with words like sexy and provocative. Looking back, I realized he was subtly working on me for months, and unfortunately, I fell for it. I can't recall the exact sequence of events that led to me being half-naked with Alan, engaging in a sexual encounter on his desk after everyone else had left for the day. Regrettably, I must admit that I enjoyed every moment of it. Alan's seduction made me feel desired, an emotion I had longed for but hadn't felt with Michael. Years later, upon reflecting on my actions, I realized the depth of my betrayal. I didn't feel desired by Michael because I didn't give him anything to desire. He respected my boundaries and treated me as his true partner and cherished lover, not just a sexual object. However, he was perceptive, and any indication from me that I wanted something different would have had a significant impact on our relationship. But I ignored his gentle attempts to spice up our sex life. I am deeply ashamed to admit that I did things with Alan that I had never done with Michael. I became entangled with Alan before realizing the truth. I even gave him my anal virginity as a gift on his birthday. He treated me like a disposable object, contrasting sharply with Michael's caring and respectful demeanor. Realizing my mistake, I ended the affair with Alan the next day. He dismissed me with a laugh, highlighting the vast difference between his treatment of me and Michael's. It was a painful lesson, but it immediately changed my perspective. Alan didn't love me, and I was making a grave mistake by continuing the affair. When I returned from lunch, a package awaited me on my desk along with a note instructing me to be in Alan's office at 5:30. The contents of the package ensured my compliance, photos of Alan and me engaged in various sexual positions, serving as a reminder of the hell my life would become over the next year and a half. Engaging in sexual activities with my two coworkers, who awaited me in Alan's office, was a comparatively mild ordeal compared to the other tasks I was forced to endure during those 18 months. I won't delve into the details, but suffice it to say, I was treated as the company's pawn while Alan acted as my manipulative handler, and I despised him almost as much as I despised myself. I struggled to find a way out but always came up short. It wasn't until the depravity of my actions became unbearable that I found a solution: courage. I confronted Alan and declared that I was done, regardless of what he did with the incriminating photos. He merely laughed, and it was over. I felt foolish. When I woke up from that nightmare, I was surprised to find our household seemingly intact without me. Michael and the kids appeared to be thriving, despite the neglect I had imposed upon them. I felt remorseful for ignoring my family for so long and resolved to rededicate myself to them and make amends for my betrayal. However, a palpable distance had formed between us, one that hadn't been there before. Michael, although composed and successful, treated me like an unwelcome guest. Despite my efforts to reconnect with him through seduction and hints, he remained distant, barely touching me. After months of evaluating our marriage, lacking a sex life, intimacy, and communication, I realized I couldn't continue living in such a manner. I suggested marriage counseling, but Michael's response was silence. For weeks, he didn't utter a word to me. As my birthday approached, I allowed myself to anticipate some recognition from Michael. However, upon arriving home, I found the house empty except for a small wrapped box on the dining room table. I knew what it contained before opening it, a watch reminiscent of the one I had hastily bought for Michael's forgotten birthday years ago. His calculated gift left me seething with anger, feeling utterly disregarded and disrespected. I should have realized that something was seriously wrong. The significance of the present should have been a warning sign. Michael wasn't a malicious person. He was the kindest, most caring, and loving man I'd ever known. If I hadn't been so blinded by my anger over that gift, perhaps I could have salvaged my marriage. If I had confessed my mistakes and begged for forgiveness, there might have been hope. But in that moment, my thoughts shifted from repairing my marriage to contemplating divorce. I was saddened yet resolute. It took a few weeks to finalize the details with a lawyer. I recounted how Michael had become distant and even unkind, how he kept the children away from me, ignored my pleas for counseling, and stopped communicating with me. My lawyer was quick to seize on these details, assuring me of a favorable settlement. We went over the filing, aiming for fairness while also securing what I needed for a reasonable life. All that remained was to deliver the news. Standing in the doorway of the den, I observed the man who had once been my husband, my soulmate. He looked the same, but something had changed. Finally, I gathered my courage. "Michael, I want a divorce." There was a long silence, devoid of any visible emotion on his face. I thought I detected a hint of a smile, but perhaps it was just shock. His response caught me off guard. No shouting, no questions. "Okay." And that was it. He was served with my divorce petition the following Friday. Michael seemed in a better mood over the weekend, but if he was attempting to make amends for his recent behavior, it was too late. I wasn't in the mood for reconciliation. Even his farewell at the door as I left for work on Monday felt hollow. Arriving at the office, I sensed that something was amiss, but I couldn't fathom what it was. Inside the conference room, my boss, the company president, and our corporate lawyer were engaged in a heated argument, papers flying everywhere. Amidst the chaos, I was startled by a man waiting for me near my workstation. "Jennifer Smith?" "Yes." "You are served." The man handed me a large envelope, snapped my picture, and swiftly departed. I didn't even have a moment to sit down before the security guard and HR manager approached me. "Mrs. Smith, you are suspended pending an investigation into allegations of inappropriate workplace conduct. Please gather your personal belongings and leave the premises," the HR manager stated. Packing my things while my coworkers watched felt incredibly humiliating. Being escorted out of the building only worsened the embarrassment. I was clueless about what was happening. Barely pulling out of the parking lot, my phone rang. It was my lawyer. Before I could even say hello, she launched into a tirade about hiding crucial information and making her look like an idiot. Driving home in silence, I found the house empty upon arrival. It wasn't until I calmed down that I remembered the envelope. Michael's counterpetition hit me like a ton of bricks. Every detail of my extramarital affairs was meticulously documented. Our life savings were nearly depleted, and the word adultery stung the most. Thinking it couldn't get any worse, I attempted to seek solace from my parents, only to be labeled a whore by my father before he abruptly hung up. The following 7 days felt like the loneliest of my life, yet in hindsight, they were the good days. Michael had left a note explaining that he took the children camping and would return on Sunday. My oldest friend, Rebecca, called that evening to check on me, hinting at a DVD Michael had sent her. As my lawyer outlined the dire consequences of my situation, it became clear that I had lost everything: my job, custody of my children, and potentially all my assets. Desperate to end the lawsuits, I prepared for Michael's return, but my tear-stained face betrayed my emotions. When my family returned, their indifference cut deep. Michael, beer in hand, appeared carefree. Summoning what courage I had left, I whispered, "You'll ruin me." The venom in his response shattered me. God, I hope so. When I attempted to discuss our shared past as husband and wife, he lashed out at me, hurling insults like whore, slut, cunt, and bitch. Each word felt like a dagger. I was left speechless as he stormed out of the room. Despite his hostility, I made efforts to reconnect with Michael, but he remained silent. I wondered how he and the kids were managing without money, yet everything seemed to be fine. Occasionally, I discreetly observed him dropping off or picking up the children from school. Unable to find a job and ostracized by my parents, I moved from friend to friend, mostly divorced men, but none wanted me to stay for long. I reluctantly began therapy upon my lawyer's recommendation, hoping it might mitigate my situation in court. However, my prospects seemed bleak. During therapy, I confronted many issues, some of which I've shared with you. Near the end of our sessions, my therapist advised me to flee, to put distance between myself and my troubles. I'm unsure why he chose to respond to me. It could have been a phone call, email, or one of the numerous letters I sent. Nevertheless, returning home one day, I found a package from Michael containing a vulgarly addressed card, a large sex toy, and a bottle of lube. It was evident he knew about my infidelity and despised me, suggesting how I should occupy my time. The realization that he was aware of my betrayal was devastating. I cried profusely, especially when my temporary roommate, Robert, discovered the package and stormed out in anger, likely fueled by alcohol. Concerned when Robert didn't return, I later learned he'd confronted Michael and suffered severe injuries. His battered condition, with a shattered left femur, left me horrified, realizing my problems were affecting those around me. I recounted the events to my therapist, detailing Michael's background as an orphan and our relationship, including his actions over the 2 years he likely knew about my affair. I also disclosed what he'd done to Robert. Upon hearing the account, my therapist appeared alarmed. "You need to leave, far away from here. Cut all ties with him. No calls, no letters, no contact whatsoever. There's no chance of reconciliation. Don't even attempt it. Move forward with your life. If you push him, the likely outcome is that he'll harm you. Your actions have shattered a man on the brink of sanity. He's faced disappointment his whole life. He won't forgive or forget. Run." And so I fled, leaving behind the memory of my once perfect life for a small college town in Virginia, taking on a low-paying job. Several years later, I found a man who could tolerate me and overlook my past. He wasn't affectionate, but at least he didn't mistreat me. Our relationship lacked love, only providing companionship. It felt like part of my punishment. As my children grew older, they reached out to say hello, acknowledging our shared existence but showing no interest in reconnecting. They didn't ask to see me or involve me in their lives. Meanwhile, Michael thrived without me, making headlines in the software industry and amassing significant wealth. His personal life remained private. I encountered him once more at my daughter's wedding, surprised by the invitation. He appeared impeccable, the man I had once loved and betrayed. I felt a pang of fear as he approached me for a final remark. "Just so you know, you destroyed my life first." His gaze lingered on my modest wedding ring, and I regretted ever wearing it. "I'm glad you found someone. I hope he brings you happiness." With that, he walked away. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel not to miss new videos.